Today we are journeying into a really compelling, maybe slightly haunting corner of the Warcraft lore we've been given. Forget the huge epic battles for just a second. We're talking about something much more subtle, much more, well, internal, and frankly, pretty tragic.
That's right. This isn't just about clear-cut heroes and villains. Based on the sources we've been exploring for this deep dive, we're really looking at the story of a soul. And, not just any soul. We're specifically digging into the idea of half a soul.
Half a soul. It sounds strange, right? You might think, the whole story of Arthas Menethil, the Prince of Lord Arryn who became the Lich King. It sort of feels like a closed book.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But the material we've got here suggests this really fascinating possibility. What if the world did move on from him? What if the battles were fought, they were won, but something of him actually remains?
Something forgotten, maybe. Broken, definitely, yet maybe. Maybe still here. So our mission for this deep dive is really to trace that unsettling thread through his history. To unpack this idea, just as it's presented in our sources, that a piece of Arthas Menethil might still endure. Separate from the monster he became.
Okay, let's jump right in then. And remember, you, our listener, you're right here with us exploring this. It's quite a journey. All right, let's start at the beginning. Or maybe more accurately, the beginning of the end for the prince. According to the source material we're looking at, where does this deep fracture in Arthas really begin?
It all starts with fire. You know the one, the infamous fire of Stratholme.
Oh yeah.
Our sources point to this moment as the initial break. Not necessarily the full fall into darkness yet, but the critical fracture. Arthas, back then the Golden Prince of Lord Arryn, he makes this, agonizing decision. Purging the city, killing its infected citizens.
And his motivation, as the source describes it, was grim, like killing thousands. But in his mind, it was to save millions from the plague spreading everywhere.
Exactly, and what a moment. It's really interesting that the source specifically frames it as a fracture.
Yeah, that word choice. It suggests it wasn't like flipping a switch, right? More like a crack appearing under just immense pressure.
Precisely. Not a sudden plunge, but a breaking point. And that breaking point, that crack, it just kept widening. And that led him on that desperate journey north, toward Northrend.
Right, Northrend.
Yeah.
The land of ice and shadows. And it's there, of course, he finds the object everyone links to his downfall. The rune blade Frostmourne. What did the sources say Frostmourne actually promised him? Because he was desperate at that point.
Power. Simple as that, really. The promise was immense power. Power he believed he desperately needed to fight the Scourge, to destroy the necromancer Mal'Ganis.
The Dreadlord pulling the strings behind the plague.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Arthas took the blade, despite the warnings, despite the curse written right there.
And this is where our source material reveals something absolutely crucial. Something that goes way beyond just simple corruption or being mind-controlled.
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting and absolutely central to our deep dive today. Frostmourne didn't just dominate or corrupt Arthas in the way you might normally think. The source tells us it split him.
A literal split, you mean, like of his actual soul?
That's the concept presented. The source describes one half of his soul being sealed within the blade itself, like trapped inside Frostmourne. And this half, it contained all the darker elements, things maybe forged in that moment at Stratholme, or perhaps stuff that was always there, just under the surface. The rage, the raw ambition, that unrelenting will to get the job done, no matter the cost.
Okay, so one half goes into the sword. What about the other half? The part left, with his body.
Well, that other half remained with him, but it held the aspects that just weren't compatible with what Frostmourne needed him to be. His memories, his growing guilt over Stratholme, over everything else, and crucially, the remnants of the part of him that once felt love, compassion, that sort of thing.
The human part.
Yeah, the human part. But the source notes this part was quiet, overwhelmed. It wouldn't last long, not in its active state anyway. So from the moment he picked up that blade, his soul was literally torn in two.
Wow. Okay, so after taking Frostmourne, after enduring that profound split, Arthas returns home. But he wasn't the Prince Lord Arryn remembered, was he?
No, not at all. The source says he came back as a weapon.
A weapon.
A devastating weapon for the Scourge. His return, it was marked by just horrific acts. He slaughtered his own father, King Tyrrhenus Menethil II, right there on the throne.
Chilling moment.
Then he marches his undead army straight to Quel'Thalas, the High Elf Kingdom. He razes their capital city, Silvermoon, defiles their sacred Sunwell, all to raise the necromancer Kel'Thuzad as a powerful lich.
And he didn't stop there, did he?
No. He also raised the Ranger General Sylvanas Windrunner into undeath, cursed her to serve him as a banshee. These actions, they really cemented his transformation. There was no turning back.
It's just a catalog of atrocities, really. And this dark path, it led him ultimately back to Northrend, to the frozen throne itself.
It did. He ascended the steps of Icecrown Citadel, went up that spire, and performed the final fateful act, donning the Helm of Domination.
The artifact that controlled the Scourge.
Right. And merging his spirit with the spirit of Ner'zhul, the original Lich King who was trapped inside it. Our source tells us that in that specific moment, Arthas Menethil, the man, He was seemingly gone, wiped away.
Seemingly gone. But the source immediately qualifies that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It says he wasn't entirely gone. So if the man was supposedly gone, what was left? What does that even mean?
It means there was an internal conflict. The source material, it draws from glimpses we get in other lore, dreams, novels, memories within the game itself. It shows there was still a war being waged inside the Lich King's mind. The fused entity, Arthas and Ner'zhul, it wasn't entirely singular. There was still something fighting in there.
And that vision of Matthias Laner, that's a key example the source brings up, right? Of that internal struggle.
Precisely. The source references the specific vision where the Lich King, mentally confronts and banishes this little boy named Matthias Laner. And Matthias is described as basically a manifestation of Arthas' lost innocence, his humanity. In that moment, the Lich King persona, it believed it had finally silenced the last whisper of its former self. Crushed it.
Our source directly counters that belief. It says that quiet, overwhelmed half of his soul, the one that didn't go into Frostmourne initially, while it wasn't in control, not at all, it wasn't fully extinguished either.
Exactly. That internal struggling piece, the memory of the prince, it was still there, just buried incredibly deep within the Lich King entity.
Okay, so let's fast forward. Years pass. The Lich King reigns supreme from Icecrown Citadel. He seems invincible, this frozen god of death. But eventually, the forces of Azeroth, they finally mount a full assault.
That's right. We jump ahead to the culmination of that huge campaign inside Icecrown Citadel itself. The champions of Azeroth, led by High Lord Tyrion Fordring of the Argent Crusade, they finally stand before the Lich King on the frozen throne.
And despite his, just immense power, he was defeated. Against all odds, really.
He was! And in those final moments, High Lord Tyrion Fordring, empowered by the Holy Light, manages to strike the blow that shatters Frostmourne.
The very blade that had split him, consumed him, defined him for so long. What happened, according to the source, when that cursed rune blade finally broke?
Well, according to our source, there was this huge outpouring of souls from the blade. Countless victims, allies he'd killed, enemies he'd slain, innocents caught in the crossfire. All these souls have been trapped inside Frostmourne for years. They were finally freed.
A torrent of souls.
Yeah, and among the souls released, the source specifies, was one half of Arthas.
One half. Not his whole soul came out.
That's the crucial distinction the source makes, and it's easy to miss. The half of Arthas that was released when Frostmourne shattered, it was specifically the half containing the rage, the ambition, the cold will. Basically the part that had been sealed within the blade and was fundamentally tied to its power. The part that was the Lich King's driving force.
Okay, so the other half. The quiet one. The guilty one we talked about earlier. The piece that held his memories and maybe remorse. That part wasn't released.
No. According to the source we're looking at, that half remained. It was kind of forgotten in the immediate aftermath of that massive battle. Maybe people assumed it had just dissipated or was just destroyed along with the Lich King persona, but it wasn't part of that flood of souls pouring out of Frostmourne in Icecrown Citadel. It stayed bound somehow.
Right, and this is where the story takes another really unexpected turn, isn't it?
Yeah.
Reaching far beyond Northrend into a whole different realm.
It absolutely does. Our sources connect this forgotten fragment, or at least the essence it was bound to events revealed much later. During the time adventurers spent in the Shadowlands, the true villain behind so many of Azeroth's problems going way back was revealed to be the jailer, Zoval.
The jailer, right. And how does he connect back to Arthas and this forgotten soul fragment?
Well, the jailer, in his massive cosmic scheme for domination, he needed powerful tools, weapons. And our source reveals that he reached back, somehow, into the lingering remnants of Frostmourne's power. Specifically targeting the splintered shard of Arthas, that piece of his soul still bound to the runeblade's lingering essence, the half that hadn't been released at Icecrown.
And he used this fragment. You didn't just leave it.
He used part of it, yes. He used it to forge a new weapon, a new runeblade echoing Frostmourne called Kingsmourne.
Kingsmourne.
Oh man, the blade wielded by his new captive, High King Anduin Wrynn.
Exactly that one. So in this really dark, twisted, almost cyclical way, a piece of Arthas Menethil was kind of reborn. Not as a person, obviously, but as steel. As a weapon of domination wielded by a hero who was twisted into a puppet, much like Arthas himself had been.
That is just a horrifying legacy for that part of him. But hang on, our source makes another important point about Kingsmourne, doesn't it? Similar to Frostmourne's effect. Yes. It emphasizes that when the jailer forged Kingsmourne from this lingering essence, this soul fragment, he only took what he needed. He took the part he could weaponize the residue of domination, the cold tactical will, the connection to Frostmourne's power.
Leaving something behind.
Exactly. The source states that the rest of that original fragment, the forgotten half, the silent half that remained after Frostmourne shattered, the part that held the memories and guilt, that part was left behind. It wasn't incorporated into Kingsmourne. It wasn't needed by the jailer, so it wasn't destroyed. According to this interpretation, it's still somewhere, still existing.
Okay, let me try and recap this because it's a lot. So after the culling of Stravholm, the fracture, taking Frostmourne, the soul splits, becoming the Lich King, merging with Ner'zhul, the shattering of Frostmourne at Icecrown, releasing only the will half. Then the jailer uses a piece of that will half's essence for Kingsmourne. There's still another part of Arthas Menethil, the original memory and guilt half, that endured through all of that.
That's the fundamental question the source is really digging into. what actually happens to a soul when it's split so fundamentally, and its different pieces are subjected to such incredibly different, horrifying fates. One half, or the essence tied to it, became a tool. First in Frostmourne, then partly reforged into Kingsmourne, used, and then ultimately, it seems, discarded when the jailer was done.
And the other half, the one that wasn't weaponized, the one that didn't get released when Frostmourne broke. What about that piece?
That's the half that lingers, according to the source material we have, and its exact state, or maybe even its location, is left as a bit of a mystery. It's open to speculation within the material itself.
The source lists a few possibilities for that, right?
Yeah.
Like theories on where this forgotten half might actually be.
Yeah, it touches on a few different ideas floating around. Some speculate it's still lost somewhere in the maw, just another tormented soul fragment among countless others down there. Others suggest maybe it dissolved or merged into the very fabric of Oribos, the central city or hub of the Shadowlands afterlife system. Just became part of the general flow of soul energy, almost like background noise. And then there's the more haunting whisper, the idea that it might hide in echoes, attached somehow to places or moments that were profoundly marked by his actions, places filled with grief, fear, or regret tied to him.
Wow. Regardless of the specific location, though, the source seems pretty clear on what this lingering piece isn't. It's not like a fully formed ghost walking around. It's not the man he once was.
Yeah.
Or just a presence. Epithet?
Subtle but really significant distinction, yeah. And our source highlights this, particularly when it discusses those encounters people had with echoes or memories of Arthas back in the Shadowlands expansion.
You mean that moment with Uther the Lightbringer, Jaina Proudmoore, and Sylvanas Windrunner? When they confronted what looked like his spirit, that little anima wisp in the maw.
Exactly that moment. Our source's interpretation, based on what we're reading, is that when they looked upon that spectral figure, that little blue wisp, they didn't actually see him, not the entirety of what might remain. They saw the weapon he had become. They saw the projection of the pain he inflicted as the Lich King. They saw the memory of the monster, the echo of his actions.
So they basically saw the consequences. The persona forged by Frostmourne and the Helm of Domination, the Lich King part or its remnants.
Yes. And crucially, according to our source material here, they never encountered the part of him that still remembers the man he was. The piece that still carries the burden of his guilt, perhaps. The part that was never actually freed when Frostmourne shattered, and was bypassed again when the jailer forged Kingsmourne. It remained untouched by those events.
So that quiet half, maybe the remorseful half, it could still be out there, unseen, unheard, unknown even by the people who knew him best, who loved it most before everything went wrong. That's a deeply solitary and incredibly tragic potential fate, isn't it?
It really is.
And this lingering mystery, this possibility, it brings us right to the final point. Our source material kind of prompts us to consider the big what if question.
It's the natural, almost speculative conclusion you draw from this whole idea, isn't it? If there's a forgotten piece of his soul still existing somewhere, well, what then? What if that piece, the fragile, maybe uncorrupted half that was left behind, the part that remembers being a prince, what if it still remembers everything?
Everything. Not just the atrocities, but maybe the bright prince he once was, the friendships he had, the love he felt, that original, maybe noble desire to protect his people, even if it got twisted.
And what if? What if it watches the world he tried to save, but ultimately failed, certainly in the way he intended back at Stratholme? A world that has largely moved on, that's healed in some places, but still bears the deep scars of his reign as the Lich King.
A world that, let's be honest, mostly remembers him only as the embodiment of evil, as the ultimate villain.
And what if, our source asks, what if it simply waits?
Waits. Waits for what, though? For an opportunity. For someone to find it. Or maybe just waits for oblivion. For fading away completely.
The source does briefly touch on the whole theme of redemption in Azeroth's lore. We know it's rare, right? Especially for figures as, well, monumental in their evil as the Lich King. But the possibility isn't entirely zero. And it connects this to a really poignant idea. Maybe his soul is only truly gone, truly erased from existence, when it is completely forgotten by everyone and everything.
And if this piece of Arthas still exists, somewhere, somehow, if it still remembers, if it still observes, then maybe he hasn't been entirely forgotten, even if this specific part of him is totally unknown and unseen by the world.
Which leads right to the source's final, very quiet suggestion. Perhaps Arthas Menethil is still here, in some form, some fragmented way.
Not as the king on the frozen throne, obviously. Not as the monster who brought so much ruin. Not as the weapon reforged by the jailer.
No. But as the source describes it, like a whisper, a faint echo of a man. Perhaps waiting, somewhere out there in the vastness of the cosmos, just waiting to be heard. Or maybe just waiting.
Wow. That's a genuinely haunting and, very thought-provoking idea to be left with after tracing this whole story.
Okay.
Wow, this deep dive into the sources surrounding Arthas Menethil's soul has definitely unveiled layers of complexity and real sadness I hadn't fully pieced together quite like that before.
It's quite a journey, isn't it? From the fire of Stratholme, that initial fracture, the split of his soul by Frostmourne, the terrifying reign as the Lich King, then the shattering of the blade with the release of only half his soul, the dark reuse of a fragment of that essence for Kingsmourne, and then this compelling, lingering possibility of a forgotten, enduring half. still out there.
Yeah, that central mystery really sticks with you. The part of him that might still exist, completely separate from the monster, the weapon, the icon of evil he became. The idea that a piece of the prince might still be out there somewhere, maybe weeping, maybe remembering, maybe just waiting.
It truly makes you reevaluate the entire story of Arthas Menethil, doesn't it? What does this possibility, just based on the sources we've explored today, what does it make you think about his legacy, his ultimate fate?
It makes me think that even in the most, well-known, seemingly finished stories in this lore, there can be these really profound nuances, these lingering questions just beneath the surface, and that the tales we believe are totally over. Well, maybe they just have parts of themselves still waiting to be discovered, or maybe just waiting, period.
That's a fascinating thought to leave with you, the listener.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this particular deep dive into a really complex and kind of moving piece of lore, all guided by the source material we got to unpack today. We love exploring these detailed possibilities with you.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Until our next deep dive.